Thank you, everybody, for showing up here. I'm very excited to have you on board. Just to give a recap, I think everybody knows at this point, but we're here to do a live edit today. I'm not going to spend the entire time focused just on the editing piece, though. I want to talk a lot about what's going to be happening early on in the process, everything that leads up to the edit, and then the process that happens post edit as well. So hopefully, we're going to be able to fill the time up just fine. And I think we're going to have a good time here. Instead of going straight into the edit, what I want to do is talk about the thought process that goes in beforehand. Now, what we're going to see here when I edit today is going to be sight unseen because that's going to be a lot more fun that way. I think, hey, Seema, what's up? Seema, while we're waiting here, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what you do and leave a link to your website? So the thought process that I have before I go into any article, it always starts with the ideation process. And what I see a lot of just from other editors that I've talked to and being a guest blogger for a lot of different places early on in my career is that you'll start off with the keyword list, right? Or we want to target the specific key phrase. And here are all the different things that we need to include in that. And when I try to think about that a little bit differently. And what I like to do through an ideation process is one, you got to validate whether or not something's either going to be searched for or people are even going to care about the thing. The content development in the very beginning is something I feel like needs a lot more thought early on just to make sure that it's going to land really well. Now, as a writer, I've got plenty of ideas, things that I like to do where I think that this is going to be an excellent piece. I'll put my heart and soul into it. And then it just turns out nobody cares. So when I'm ideating and I'm validating an idea, I'm going through and I'm not only doing the keyword research, but I'm also looking at things like how have other people written about this? What is the search demand, of course, but then looking at places like BuzzSumo and Ahrefs, I will also take a look at what the social chatter is around some of this. And really get a strong sense of what people are saying. Is there even a demand for this topic? Are people sharing on it? And is this something that people genuinely care about? And if not, then why put it out there, right? Now, there is this balance between, is there an existing demand or am I trying to create a demand? And in that case, you have to really think about that creative development a little bit more. But you also have to think about who are you going to distribute this to later on in the process, right? Who is on the brink of this idea and then move it forward. And for me, like personally, I'm experiencing this right now because I think some of that I am focused a lot on automation and workflow optimization and content ops. And the major thing with that is identifying that it's this problem that's on the tip of everybody's tongue, but can't really vocalize. And with that, right, comes a lot more of the creative development aspect, trying to make sure that everything there is something that's interesting to people, but then also knowing who I'm going to talk about, who I'm going to send it out to afterwards. So it's a lot of one-on-one conversation with people. What I try to do in that ideation process, after I've figured out if this is something that people are going to be interested in, is I will personally meditate on what somebody would need to get out of this piece. And I'll take 15, 20, 30 minutes, sometimes longer than that, to really put myself in the shoes of the person who might be searching or discovering this piece over social. And this is a holdover from when I was an actor. I was a career actor for probably 10 years or so. And this is one of those things where if you can get into the head of your reader ahead of time, and if you could really spend a lot of time thinking about that challenge and feeling what that challenge is, and not just going, okay, from a surface level of what they might think or want or whatever, it's really going, what is the implication of them not being able to solve this problem? What is the big challenge that they're trying to overcome? And it's not just, oh, these people need to have better advertising or they need to optimize these different things on a website or anything. Like I've managed the QuickBooks website, right? It's not just a matter of like, how do I manage my cash flow? The implication of not being able to do these things is probably more important than the ability to communicate how to do these things. And what this infuses the writing with, as you're writing through the piece and you're keeping these things in mind, is it creates this subtext of if you do these things, then these problems are solved. And it's not even necessarily something that has to make it to the page of what that subtext is, but it's the way you're presenting that information that makes it that makes it something that there's another story happening inside that person's head as they're reading the piece. It's not just the stuff that's on the page. It's the thing that they're thinking, the story that they're telling themselves by reading the thing that you're putting out there. And this is true for all media formats. It's not just blog posts. It's not just writing. It's everything that you produce is this thought process that's going on behind the scenes in their head as they're going through and interacting with this content. And a way that I've really been able to focus on this, one of the things that I really there's a framework that I've found is very helpful with this, and we'll start getting into some slides here, is before going into any piece, and this was something that was applying specifically to podcasts, but it really applies to anything, is going into a piece of content, right? For somebody with a job to be done, your piece of content will grant them the power of whatever that power is, right? Whereas today they have to do this bad, boring thing. After paying attention to your content, they will be able to do good, interesting thing. For me, like with this particular live stream, I'm thinking to myself, for people who are editing content either at scale or writing content at scale, this live stream will grant you the power of seeing what's going on behind the scenes for an editor who's done something to infuse your writing with these particular principles that were going on. Whereas today, you might be going through this on your own and getting feedback from externally. After listening to this podcast, or this, not podcast, but after listening to this live stream, you should be able to understand the subtext of what's going on between the pieces and build better structure and tell a better story in the content that you're creating. And if you have the ability right now to take a screenshot of this, cool. I will also be posting this stuff up on YouTube after the live stream, and I'll make sure that slides in here as well. So after that, right, after I've gone through this sort of creative development process with myself, essentially it's then a conversation with the author, right? Now, a lot of editors that I've spoken with, and I was actually surprised to learn this as I've been going through this development process with the content studio, a lot of people will just outline and give the author an outline and say, hey, do this. We've got a few writers in here. Tell me, is this something that you've experienced when you've been working with your clients, where that particular editor says, these are the key phrases I want to hit. Here are the subheaders. These are XYZ points that I want to hit. And it's very transactional in that regard. Now, when I edit, if I'm able to really have the time to connect with my author, I try to have an actual one-on-one conversation, right? We'll have a Zoom call or a Google Hangout where we talk about this emotional quality. We talk about the things that they've meditated on and try to have this conversation about all of the different things that might be happening in this person's life before they read this piece. Why are they being interested in it? Or why would they be interested in it? Why would they click on it? How are we going to keep them engaged? What are some of these challenges that they might be having? Again, what are the implications if they don't solve whatever this problem is? And all of those little subtextual things that we're talking about. And what I've noticed is, especially with CXL and Shopify, where I did a lot of really good work in this regard, is that it gives the writer a lot more to work off of, a lot more of that substance underneath the piece that wouldn't necessarily exist before. And we all see this, right? The question is, what was the last blog post that you read? I ask people that a lot, and you can't remember it. A lot of people don't remember the last thing that they read because it wasn't super memorable, because it was just surface level stuff that lived on the page. And my goal as an editor and as a writer is to have this stuff lift itself off the page. And I want someone to be late for work. I want someone to miss their next meeting. I want somebody to open 15 tabs by the time they're done with this piece. And I want them to be a return visitor to the web. Return visits, some of you probably have heard this before if you've listened to me on any podcast before. Return visits is always my true north metric, especially in the B2B space, because without a return visitor, you're never going to get into that consideration when it comes to them wanting to buy things from you. So that's how you're really able to build those relationships with return visitors, and by understanding those challenges, or at least really thinking about those challenges as they're going into this particular piece. So this is a conversation, right? This is a conversation, or it's a detailed set of stream of consciousness notes that I'm going to put out there that really detail all of these different things that I think should be hit in this piece, and what that emotional quality is that I want somebody to walk away from. Because I also respect what that relationship is like with the author. I'm the first, and there's a level of vulnerability that should exist, and there's a level of pushing each other that needs to exist to make these pieces better as we go along. I'm not the end all be all. I don't know everything about this subject, and I want people to rely on their own experiences, or bring their own experiences to the table as we write these pieces, and draw metaphors with each other, and with the author still find these emotional qualities. What are the things, even if you're not a subject matter expert in these areas, what are the things that you can still draw on your own experiences from to make the piece better? Some of the people that I've worked with on client work, we're talking about somebody having anxiety before they give a software demo, right? Now, the person who's writing it might have never given a software demo in their life, but they have had client conversations before. They have had to close deals before as an author, or as somebody who's trying to make sales. And that anxiety before you get on a call with anybody to do anything can definitely exist. What's that feel like in your chest? What are your hands doing? What does it feel like to be in that position? And then from there, you take the textual knowledge that you can find, and the research that you can find, and bring that into the piece, right? And now you've got this emotional quality that's underlying or underpinning the entire piece that you're creating. Learned a lot of this from acting conservatory when I was there. It's always about what that subtext is. What are people saying between the lines? If they catch you, if you're saying what's on the page, Robert McKee says this, if people are saying what they're saying on the page, you're in deep shit. I'm paraphrasing that. I'm probably butchering the quote, but the idea is that we're always feeling something else. Our words are never just our words. Our words always imply something else. And that's the thing all of this practice that I'm talking about is really trying to get to. I'd love to get your thoughts in the chat on that. Do I sound like a crazy person when I talk about this? Because this is really my thought process as I'm going into a piece. Yeah, is this something that, like, I would love to know, is this something that you're also doing? Is anybody else going through this exercise, or exercises like this, as you're going into a piece? When there's enough time. Yeah, deadlines are always a thing. Got to make the money. Oh, perfect. All right. Not crazy. Wrote it down. You understand the implications to the reader. Yeah, not knowing the info. Thanks. It's really important. You've probably seen, if you haven't seen it, I've created a content code that's specifically for the content that I develop. But part of that code is understand what that reader's going through. And if this person can't solve their problem, is their marriage going to collapse? Is their job on the line if they don't fix this problem? What is that state of mind when they're coming into this piece with some sort of emergency or some sort of urgency? It really changes the way that we think about how we present the information, because it infuses it with this other energy of, I really care, I really understand, I've been here. Even if I haven't been in this specific challenge, I've got an empathy for whatever that challenge is that you're going through. And I think that's really important. So yeah, let's see if I'm just looking at my notes here. Cool. All right. So I'm going to jump into the edit itself. I haven't seen this piece before, which means I haven't been able to go through all of this with the author originally, but it's something that I'm keeping in mind as I'm going through it. And I'll walk you through step by step what my process is here. And I have some other things that I'm going to be referencing here to give you a backup on my history, or where I've pulled some of this information as I've gone along. All right, so we're just going to hop right in. Let's see. Focus screen over here. Okay, cool. So this is a piece by William Harris. He is the founder of Element, excellent Facebook ad agency. If you are in the market for some Facebook ads, I highly recommend you check them out. We're going to enter full screen here. And I'm going to zoom in on this because it looks like it is fairly small. All right, cool. You should be able to see that a little bit better. Okay, so the subject matter here is Facebook ads, ROAS, death spiral, fix it now or lose your Shopify store. And to give a little bit of context of what's been happening with Facebook advertising and advertising in general is the third-party cookie for advertising is disappearing, right? It's Facebook's locked down a lot of their security feed and a lot of the tracking issues, and Apple's kind of blocking a lot of information that's happening. I'm not a Facebook ads expert, so I can't really speak to the overall challenge of what's happening, like the day-to-day in the weeds challenge, but I do know that for people who are in the online advertising space, this past year in particular has been incredibly difficult because of that. And we can see from the headline here, Alex has already done, William, has already done a really good job of setting that pace, setting the context of what the piece is going to be. And that really gives me the stakes early on in the process. Fix it now or lose your Shopify store. Incredible. That's going to grab my attention in the feeds where I might be paying attention to something like this, where I might discover this. And something that's interesting about this headline too, and I've been saying this a lot more over the last year, is think about when you're writing your piece, think about what would happen if Google wasn't an option. Search engine optimization has become incredibly more competitive over the last few years. All the spaces seem to be saturated. And to be frank, in my mind anyways, I know there are plenty of people who disagree with this, but in my mind, SEO is a rich man's game at this point. And to what I'm asking myself a lot now is, what if Google wasn't an option? What if social media wasn't an option? How would these pieces carry themselves along the way? And what Slack channels in a company, within a company, might this be shared in if you're writing in B2B? Or what Facebook groups might that be shared in if you're doing something that's more consumer based? What internal email newsletters would this particular piece be shared? And really trying to break the habits of thinking about what Google thinks about this, because that really does change what we write about that, when part of the end goal is like, can I get this ranked, right? It really can take away from the overall quality of the piece, or it pulls away from that emotional quality that we're talking about because we're trying to do too many things at the same time. And real quick, before I get into that too, there are really 4 goals for content. I believe this wholeheartedly. One is to be shared. One of them is to generate leads, and one of them is to make sales, right? So you've got 4 real goals there. And what I try to think about when I'm writing and as I'm communicating to the author what I'm looking for is, which one of those goals, and one goal specifically, are you trying to achieve as you're writing a piece? Do I want to write this piece to get a lot of comments? That's going to change it's going to change the context of how you write the piece. If you want to do it to generate shares, again, it's going to change the way you think about how you write this thing. So keep that in mind. Okay. All that aside, we're going to take a look at this piece. So right now, already, first off, we're setting the context. Fix it now or lose your Shopify store. Cool. First thing I'm going to do, right, is I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to scan it. And the reason I'm going to scan it, first and foremost, is we already know from a ton of research that people don't read word for word. A lot of the reading that happens is through scanning. And what I'm trying to look for when I'm scanning is, are these subheaders pulling me in? And are there other areas that are stopping my attempt to dive into this piece a little bit more? And already we can see we've got some decent subheaders here. That's one of the things I would fix as we go in here. But more importantly, we have imagery that kind of breaks up our eye path, which subconsciously resets our brain. When I edit, not just these pieces, but when I edit video as well, that's one of the things that I'm always trying to do, is find this rhythm of how I can reset people's attention. And that's one of the things that we really have to think about, is what is the rhythm of a piece. Now, as we're looking through here, we can see very quickly scanning, we have a lot of car metaphors as we're going along. We've got police. Again, we go back to the car metaphor, and he's doing a really good job here of doing these imageries, putting the imagery throughout. Now, this is a 40-page piece, so we're not going to necessarily go through the whole thing, but we can see there is a pretty solid rhythm of what is going on here. And it's breaking up the eye path just enough where we can go through. Now, we're this far down the page, and I don't know how many words we're in, but we're on page, let's see, what page are we on? Page 11, and this is the first part where I really start seeing some graphs. And as I'm going through this, and as I'm, thinking about Facebook ads ROAS, so return on ad spend, I would know going into this as a reader what that means. As I'm scrolling through, I might want to have more graphs early on. I might want to have more of this quantifiable data early on. Otherwise, I might not see it. Now, the other thing that I'm noticing as I'm going through this piece is we've got some subheaders along the way. We've got big, bold text, which really can draw my eye in a little bit more. But these automotive related and police related imagery, it might not give me enough context up front. So that's something that I'm looking at. The other thing I'm noticing as I'm going through here is we don't have a lot of subheaders going through. We have a lot of imagery going through, but we don't have a lot of subheaders, which means that as I'm scanning, I'm losing some of that context that we're getting or that we're trying to get as we go through. The other thing that I'm noticing is that the subheaders themselves don't give me that context and therefore isn't really drawing me into whatever that next section is. As I think about subheaders, I try to think about not only can I give that context to the scanner and can I give them everything they need up front to do that, but also am I going to have a subheader that's attention grabbing enough to pull them back into the piece and try to arrest their attention to get them back into reading word for word. I want them to feel like they're missing out if they don't see what's happening before or after. John Morrow does a really good job of this. He describes it as sweater knit copy. And there's an excellent article that was written many years ago that you can find here in the chat that's about subheaders. And it gives many different, it demonstrates that what we're talking about as we're going through it. So steal these moves from the subhead honor roll. Cool. We've got the spoiler subhead, the cryptic subhead. We've got the plain label subhead blunders that people make before they bounce, right? Recommended cure for scanning. So this piece does exactly what it's talking about, and it makes you want to see what's happening a little bit more. Now, what John doesn't do in this piece is have a lot of imagery, but the subheaders are doing more of the job here to try and pull you in. The ultimate guide to writing irresistible subheads, and then the first subhead that you see here is why it doesn't matter how great your content is. Okay, gets me thinking, makes me want to pull into the piece a little bit more. I'd love to get your ideas on subheaders before we keep going with this. What are some of the practices that you do when you're writing your subheads? I'll give you just a moment here to type about that in the chat. See if there's anything happening on the social medias here. Cool. All right. Yeah, as we're going through the rest of this, I would love to learn a little bit more about what your subhead practices are, or if this is something that you're really thinking about as you're going along in the writing process, because a lot of times it's more of an after, at least from my experience. Now, what I'm seeing here, that's all the sort of upfront work that I'm looking at as I go through the piece. And now we're going to get into it. All right, so TLDR, Facebook ads reporting on ROAS is broken. Awesome. You're likely pulling back on Facebook ads as a result and hurting your business even more. That's very interesting. Why is that happening? Okay. Switching to a different metric based on two cold hard facts of your business, money leaving your bank and money going into your bank, can get you back on track and scaling profitably again. Okay. All right, cool. I've got a lot of context now that I'm reading word for word. I've got a lot of context going into the piece. All right, let's get into it. All right, so I'm going to put this in suggesting mode. I don't have all the answers, so this is just my thought. Okay, so here's the situation. You walk into a bar alone, and I always read things out loud as I'm going through the piece because I want to make sure that there's a decent flow of the words as we're going through. You walk into a bar alone. The priest and the rabbi don't join you this time. Okay. You turn on the Vikings versus Packers game and put down $1,000 on 2-to-1 odds for the Vikings to win. A miracle happens and the Vikes actually won. Skull. The bookie pays you $5,000, a 5-to-1 return, and says, there you go, $2,000 for a 2-to-1 return. Okay. You're a little confused, but you've got big plans for an epic tailgating party, so you don't say anything. Next week, You wear your lucky unwashed Dalvin Cook jersey and put down a $10,000 for the Vikings to win again at 2-1. You swear you Roma Downey carry Adam Thielen like an angel into the end zone for a game-winning touchdown. The bookie pays you $50,000, a 5-1 return again, and says, there you go, $20,000 for a 2-1 return. Aside from the fact that you're likely to get mugged on your way home, you're excited because you realize that your bookie says that he's paying you 2-1, but he's actually giving you 5-1. If the bookie continues to give you 5-1, do you care that he says he's giving you 2-1? Aren't you more focused on the actual exchange of money? What if I told you that I'm almost certain you're doing the exact opposite with your Shopify store right now? Okay. I would love to get your thoughts on this. Like, first response, we've got only a handful of people here, but first response, what is your thoughts on the introduction to this piece? I'll give you a couple seconds here in the chat to discuss. So my initial thoughts here, I don't know anything about football. Yeah, Liz, okay, feels a little confusing. Okay. I don't know anything about football. And the Vikings versus Packers game, yeah. That's kind of where I got lost. Is I don't know a lot about football. I know that my home team is the Patriots. Patriots are awesome and they win all the games, and Tom Brady is the GOAT. Disagree with me if you want. That's a whole different conversation. But I'm one of those people who only watches the Super Bowl. I know these teams, but I don't know a lot more about that. And when we start talking about the bookie, yeah, we start to have these sort of odds, and it assumes that these gambling terms and that. Now, I like that. Yeah, exactly. So it's all about football. It's too specific. And we're talking about these odds, which makes a lot of assumptions about me as the reader going into this. And what I'm looking at here, if I kind of check out just how many words it takes to get to that point, we're looking at, and I try to quantify a lot of this stuff too. I will try to take a data-driven approach. We've got 300 words, right? The 300 word lead up to here before we get into the actual content of the piece. It's very specific. It assumes a lot about the reader, and it can have a really solid opportunity to lose me at the very beginning. Now, William, I love you. You know this, but this is one of those things where if I were editing this piece and it was something that would be going live on a blog that I run, I would absolutely say reevaluate the first 300 words, cut them, or get to your point a little bit faster. When we start looking at, and this is something else that I look at, I try to quantify a lot of the data. Like I look at the data layer. It's not just me looking at words. If I were to look at a heat map on this, which I frequently do, I would venture to guess that unless this is something that is a well-established thing with my audience, and there is that sort of context that I am missing here, unless this is something that is a well-established thing with the audience and like your intersection between football lovers and people who are doing Facebook advertising, if that's somebody that you're talking to based on how you've developed your audience, this might be fine. But as a general reader, I don't know what's happening here. And this is why that's why I'm going into this piece sight unseen. There's a basic level of knowledge that you have to assume about an audience. If you don't know that about your audience, then play it on the safer side. But I very frequently will say, cut the first 500 words, cut the first 300 to 500 words, almost in every piece when I look at a piece. And I do that. I know that because I also know, because I've done this, is that a lot of writers will turn in first drafts. And if you go through and you read this again from a more objective standpoint, and if you're going through and putting yourself in the mindset of the people like we were talking about in the very beginning here, this is where you say, okay, you're losing me at the very beginning here. And that's where a good outline comes in. To have such specifics, you need approval beforehand. Yeah, I'm not an outliner. I don't do well even as an editor with outliners, but this is where that conversation, to each their own, this is where that conversation comes from early on. I would try to avoid this type of thing in the very beginning, and that's really the overall point, right? All right, we know that we're going to do something with these first 300 words. I don't know what that is, but I am going to comment and say something to the long effects of. So, okay, but if you can't say with certainty, So now we've got the whole intro that we're taking care of. And if we were to get rid of all of that and we just started with Shopify store owners have a huge problem, and it's such a big problem that I'm willing to publish some radical ideas about advertising. This is the Facebook ads ROAS death spiral. Shopify owners have a huge problem. Bam. That's all we need. That gets us right to where we're going, and we don't have this 300-word ramp up that may or may not be working for the author or for the reader. So it's where we keep hidden away, tucked into our pants like a Midwestern dad's mowing shirt. Comedy is always subjective, and this is one of those things. Again, know your audience might be good with this. Some audience might not be. And it really depends on who you're going after and the audience development that you're doing along the way. Because our advertising agency, Element, couldn't possibly help everyone out. Okay. All right. If this were on a website that, like, as a personal preference, I don't necessarily like to be self-referential on a personal website, because I can already assume the name of my website or the name of my company because you're already there. I think the header or the navigation on the top and the header at the very top of the website makes that very clear. But if this is something that's maybe being syndicated and you have a lot of syndication that's happening across the board, that might be cause for that. If not, if you don't have a syndication network set up, then you might be able to leave that out. All right, subheader number 1, what's the matter with you? Okay, that doesn't really connect to, and we indicated this earlier, this subheader doesn't connect to the headline, and we're going to comment on that. Basically, stuff we've already talked about on the stream here. We've been auditing and taking on new account after new account that's infected with the same disease, the Facebook ads ROAS death spiral. I'm not generally a huge fan of the what is subheaders, but in this, that actually might be a decent subheader here, because we're talking about the first thing that you see is the Facebook ads ROAS death spiral. What is the Facebook ads ROAS death spiral? Might be a really great way to pull people in and take that here. And the rest of this, we've been auditing and taking on new account after new account that's infected with the same disease. There we go. That really draws you in. You used to get a much better ROAS for Facebook ads, but something just isn't working lately. Okay, cool. We're getting into that subtext. We understand what's happening with the reader. We're getting into that feeling that people might have going into it. And then we're saying, you're blaming the agency. Let's go, guys. You need to figure out how to get us back on the same ROAS we had last year. Have you tested this audience? Cool. What I like about this is that it is assuming a conversation that people are already having, and it demonstrates that knowledge of the market and the conversations that they're having along the way. I love that, because it gives this sense of, we know what we're talking about. Here's the conversations that we're having. And it sets up the rest of this conversation of, well, kind of, but let me inform you as we're going along of what we're doing here. Your agency is blaming the iOS 14 or the creative, right? Here's a subtle little dig at competitors, and it goes back into that thing that I was talking about before with the iOS updates and the Facebook updates, where everything is changing. And a lot of other agencies, basically what this is saying is a lot of other agencies are placing blame because they don't necessarily know what's happened. And we do, and we understand this because we know the conversations that we're having, and let us help you fix that. What I love about this is that it is subtextual. This is, again, it's going back to that conversation that we were having before about understanding the problem and understanding what's going on in their head and identifying that problem without saying, so you need to send us more creative, more and more. That's not good enough. It has to be better. Content marketers, you see this all the time. So it's good to know that this isn't exclusive to just us. All the while, it's causing both of you, client and agency, to make series of truly scary decisions, putting both of your businesses in jeopardy. Perfect. The client's random test ideas from the list of bad Facebook ad tactics that ignore how the algorithm works. I love it. Creates unnecessary time spent and budget wasted on tactics that won't drive incremental revenue, reducing the time and budget spent on things that the data actually supports doing. Although the data isn't being tracked or understood by most agencies right now. We'll get to this shortly. This is a lot of sentence, right? How many words? This is one sentence. How many words is this? We've got a whole paragraph that's a sentence here. And we have an opportunity, 67 words here, one sentence. When I look at sentences, a sentence structure in particular, and a paragraph structure in particular, is I do try to look for a flow between the words, and punctuation is really underrated in this case, and word choice is really underrated here. So I'm not going to give a specific edit because I want to basically take the next 12 minutes that we have here, 13 minutes, geez, and talk about this. But I would want to go into better word choice here or better punctuation and tighten this particular sentence up, because 67 words back to back with one piece of punctuation here and then parentheses here. So we've got an aside. That makes it difficult for me as a reader to read, and is one of those reasons why I'll probably just scan as I'm going through, right? Your agency is spinning their wheels on the wrong things instead of scaling stuff that's already working. Okay. Because they're unaware of the real problem. Dash is good here. The actual punctuation you would want to use, I believe, and somebody who's a grammar person correct me, but that might actually be a semicolon that we'd want to use in that place. I don't usually not that pedantic, but sometimes it's important. And these bad decisions are leading to even lower performance from Facebook ads. I like how he's using bold along the way here. That's, again, a stylistic choice for a lot of people. But bolding the text as we're going through, it does have that opportunity to continue pulling people into the page and into the individual paragraphs as we're going along. I think that's really solid. I think that's a really excellent choice if that's something that's within your style guide, which leads to a final bad decision. In this cascade of misfortune, businesses are scaling back their ads week after week, month after month, because they're afraid that they are wasting money, and they want to stop the bleeding as much as possible until someone can figure out what the heck is going on. Again, we've got a really super long paragraph here. It's one sentence format. We'll look at the tools, word count. Again, we've got another 66 word paragraph here, which I try and tighten that up. And that decision, an understandable decision, but one that's based in fear, uncertainty, and lack of understanding about attribution, is causing many businesses to dig a hole that's even further from being profitable than if they had they left things alone. But this is interesting. As somebody who doesn't understand the subject matter, which puts me almost in the same shoes as somebody who would have a basic understanding of this, it does give me a lot of context in these first, it does give me a lot of context in these first few hundred words here. So if we were to cut those first few hundred words out, we've now got a quantifiable 426 words that really set up that context and what the piece is going to be about, and really sets that up. Now, if we were to take this subheader here and turn that back into the Facebook ads ROAS death spiral, what is the Facebook ads ROAS death spiral? This next subheader, Mayday, my Facebook ads are in a ROAS death spiral. We're repeating ourselves in that case. I might reevaluate this one as well, but it's something that is certainly looking at and giving a second look on a next pass of this particular article. Tony Jodin at The Atlantic tells about the harrowing tales of the death spiral. Something that I like to do, and this is just a stylistic choice, but if I'm quoting somebody, right, I try to, and this is a very long quote, so I would try to truncate as much of this as possible. But I try to add the person's face as a reminder of who this person is, as well as what their title is, and then source that in the link. I think that's another opportunity to, from a scanner standpoint, see that we're talking like a real person is giving this expertise, but we're also, if we're giving their name and their title, that gives us more of a qualification from a very easy to understand standpoint of what we're looking at there. It gives us better context very quickly to say, hey, this is a person that you need to be paying attention to. Again, that's a stylistic choice, but it's one that I found works really well and is very important. And one of the things that I look at as an editor, one of the things that I've studied, and this is a non sequitur, but is visual information processing theory. And what that essentially is, how does the brain process information overall? And this plays out really well into everything from white space on websites to breathability and typography and a number of these stylistic choices. But from a purely content writing perspective, it's the reason why people will say, stay away from very long paragraphs, which we're seeing here. I try to keep my paragraphs between 3 to 5 lines maximum. But it's one of those things where it helps you see the information or process the information a little bit better. So To be a better writer, I highly recommend looking into visual information processing theory. I'm a nerd about this stuff. I have to be, but it's something to really think about as you're going through. And the early days, decade of five. Okay. One of the things that I'm trying to understand as I'm going through this is how does this connect to what we had talked about in this next thing or in the paragraph before this? One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot more lately too is the structure of content itself. And what I'm finding a lot of content online in general does is we've got this ramp up at the beginning of subheader. We've got a plateau, a peak. We're making the point. Hold on, let me enhance the screen a little bit more. So we've got do that one more time. So you've got the subheader or the title. You've got this ramp up. You've got a peak and then a ramp down. And when you get to the next subheader, it's a ramp up, a peak, and a ramp down. And the next one, ramp up, peak, ramp down. And what we're relying on as authors and out of these pieces is that our ramp up and our peak is going to be so awesome. But in a lot of cases, that peak that we're trying to build towards is anticlimactic. It doesn't really give us what we need. Or worse, it doesn't actually peak. It just lays flat the entire time. And does that make sense? Because that's one of those things where I'm trying to see if I communicate that as well as I'd like to. Powerful insight. Cool. Thank you. So as I'm looking at the structure of the piece, that's what I'm looking at is up, peak, down, up, peak, down. As a reader, and as the first reader, and I see this all the time because this is the job, it's exhausting, right? It is an exhausting structure in my mind because I'm going through this roller coaster of pieces. What I want to see out of a lot more pieces, and the pieces that I personally enjoy a lot more of are the pieces that flow more like a waterfall. I like the pieces that flow more like a waterfall, where the subheaders aren't stopping points for new points, but they're emphasis for whatever the next point is. It's a transition. If I think about this in terms of a movie or a TV show, it's either where the commercial break is or it's moving from scene to scene, right? It's how we can transition very smoothly into the next scene. And that's something that I feel like there needs to be more of in the content that's out there, because it follows a very different cadence than all the other stuff. And it prevents us from tuning out. It creates sort of a different experience from the very beginning of the process overall. And I want to go into something else real quick here. I wanted to show this off before the stream is over because we only have about 4 minutes left. What we're looking at right here is story structure by an excellent story guru, right? I don't know if that's really the best way to put that because we've diluted that phrase a little bit more. But Robert McKee, Story. I recommend this to everybody who writes for a living. Read this book, study it front to back, and absorb as much of it as you can. What he talks about here in a typical story structure that we see in very good movies or television shows or anything is this sort of process where we've got the inciting incident, the primary cause of what happens. We do see this really well in William's piece here. We've got the escalating actions, what's at stake, are subplots involved too. Okay. Event, a cause for an effect. Another event, a cause for an effect. Event, right? These are the things that are leading to this escalation. At the end, you have to make a crisis decision, a hurdle that affects the challenge of desire, right? So when you start getting towards the end of your piece, it's this like, are you going to make a decision to do anything with this information that I've given you? Now that you have all of this, you understand all of the events. This all seems really familiar. We're talking about the things that are going to help you solve this problem, right? Going back to what this do bad, boring thing is. Once we've walked through all of the things that are going to help you fix this, are you going to do something with this, right? That's something that I think a lot of us as authors don't make our audience accountable to. And that's something we can start to work into different pieces that we create. Climax, give the audience what it wants, but not the way that it expects. This is a very interesting thing. When you get what you want, it's human psychology. We have guessing machines that we always are trying to assume what comes next. If we can deliver a climax that gives them what they want, but changes that up, changes the thing that they thought they wanted, that makes it a lot more interesting, a lot more compelling. And that's the thing that leads people to share and discuss and become leads, because you're showing that you understand the problem in a way, you have ways to solve it, but it's not typical in the way that they think that it would be going. And the resolution, the climax of effects and plot and subplots, that's what we're going after. We want to say, if you solve this problem, if you go about it this way, if you use the information that we've put out there, when you have a resolution, this is what that will look like. And then a very powerful ending is something that you can create from there. All right, we're at time. That took a little bit longer than, or that I didn't get as much through as I wanted, but I'd love to get your feedback for the people who have been here, because I see that we've had a pretty solid retention along the way. What did you think about this? Was this helpful? What was the biggest takeaway that you've gotten from this so far? Need to focus more on my subheaders. It's the biggest, it's an afterthought. It really is. It's one of those things that when I was writing on a regular basis, I'm trying to bang stuff out as much as possible. And the subheaders, it becomes a very different thing. It's not ideal. Mostly I end up putting variations on the target keyword in the subheaders. That's not ideal, but it seems like there's no choice. I guess I need to be creative there. It's interesting. It is possible to make those variations. I mean, but the question is, it always goes back to, for me anyways, it always goes back to, do I understand what the reader's going through? Do I understand that challenge? And can I put those variations in a way that makes sense? And it also goes back to what I was talking about in the very beginning on, what if Google didn't exist? That's a habit that we all have to break, that all content marketers have to break, or at least try to improve on, because that's just what we were told helps rank content. It's not necessarily even the case anymore. It's just a hangover from what we've seen work in the past. So interesting. All right, cool. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. This will be going out. I will be putting a link out to the replay on here. The YouTube channel will have the replay, and all of the resources I've put in the chat, or all of the resources that we've had here, will also go into the description on the YouTube channel. Thanks so much. If you want to check out the YouTube channel, I'll also send that out in the background or in the follow-up. It'd be great if you could subscribe. I've got a lot of other stuff going on over there too, talking about content quality, automations, workflow optimization, stuff like that. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great one.